Can I go to Rushanara, please?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chancellor. So I just wanted to, just on this final point, I think the question is, and I just want you to think about HMG, not just Treasury. I appreciate what you're saying and what the Perm Secretaries have said about the Treasury not approving any loans, but CLBILS was then accessed by Greensill, and as I said, asked in the earlier session. So I think for the taxpayer and the public, the thing they will care about is whether our government thought about this across departments. And this is where I would say that government came short, because the checks and balances ultimately didn't prevent Mr. Greensill from accessing the loans and then making it available through these 8 times 50 million pound loans to Mr. Gupta's company. So would you be able to just reflect on why, given so many significant concerns were raised, that ultimately the CLBILS scheme was the one that he managed to access through the publicly owned British Business Bank? Would you be able to just reflect on that? I appreciate it's not your direct responsibility, but your department did announce it. That scheme.
Yes, for sure. I mean, as you acknowledge, it's not our direct responsibility, so there's a limit to what I can say. You said significant concerns raised. Just to reiterate the conversation we had with the committee at the beginning of this session.
Yeah.
During the time of these discussions, there weren't significant concerns that had been raised with us by regulators about the solvency of Greensill itself. So I think it's wrong to say that there had been significant concerns raised at this time. We were not in possession of any, had no reason to think at that point, from all the information that we had, that there were. So I think that's the first point. The information that we did have about Wylands and others, as you know, about GFG, had been passed to the Department for Business, but that is separate to Greensill. Those are distinct entities, and Greensill is its own entity, and there was no reason to think there was any issue with Greensill at that moment, based on the information that we had. Now, with regard to the British Business Bank, there is an independent, or they run the accreditation process for Greensill, or for anyone accessing the CL bills, according to criteria that have been in place since 2009, because they were designed for a different loan guarantee scheme, the Enterprise Finance Guarantee Scheme, and CBILS program mirrors that accreditation process. And as I think you've received a letter from the CEO of the British Business Bank, Treasury ministers or officials have nothing to do with the...
Sure. No, I acknowledge that from the beginning, that it's not your direct responsibility. You've said that publicly in the past as well. Let's move on. So can you get, I know you will have seen ex-Prime Minister Cameron's session with us. He, in his evidence session, I wonder what you made of his remarks to the committee that there isn't really a roadmap for a young ex-Prime Minister who wants to get stuck in and help a business grow and expand, and that it would have been beneficial for some type of committee to give evidence. Do you think that, you know, he should have been able to work out that it's actually not that complicated to declare an interest, a personal financial interest, ahead of all the lobbying that he did, and actually it's not beyond the wit of a very talented former Prime Minister who won 2 elections to be able to just do that, because he might have spared all this grief for himself and everybody else and not compromise some of the things that we've talked about before.
Well, Richard, I can't speak for David Cameron. He's obviously been in front of your committee, and you've had the chance to ask him those questions directly. And I didn't actually see the hearing. Apologies for that. But as I said, I think your question's better directed at.
Sure. Let me put it a different way then. And lots of people have, tipped you as a future Prime Minister. What would you want? What would be your guiding principles if you then, when you retired after a successful career as a Prime Minister, what would you be looking for in terms of the approach so that, your reputation is protected and the integrity of a former Prime Minister's reputation is protected, and you're able to conduct the kind of business that you went on to work for a company. How do we make sure, learning from this experience, that we protect the integrity of our system and these conflicts of interest don't end up creating I think what is quite damaging, and not for the reasons that you said, because the head of the TUC didn't personally profit from lobbying you, and charities don't personally profit, and so on. And that's where the crux of this issue is, where we are all very uncomfortable about what's happened here, and most of all, I think the ex-Prime Minister actually. Could you reflect on that at least?
Again, I'm not actively planning for my retirement, Rushanara, so I haven't put a lot of thought into it.
Well, after a successful career as a future Prime Minister, I think
my understanding is, not that I'm familiar with them, my understanding is that there are a set of rules, guidelines, frameworks that govern the behaviour and interaction that former ministers and I think senior officials, but I'm not sure, have with government after they leave their position. So that's my understanding that framework exists. I think is it Eric Pickles who has written to your committee or others about that? That is, I think, a matter for the Cabinet Office, and I would imagine as part of all the reviews that are going on, that I think Eric Pickles has written to the right people, and those, his thoughts and reflections will be taken into consideration. Is probably the best reflection I can give on the situation. It's not something I'm very familiar with.
Okay, but I think given the way that lobbying interfaced with your department and other departments and public money, it is a very serious matter, isn't it? And also because in your interpretation of how you've spoken about how it might put off businesses or put off others from coming to departments like yours, there is a broader issue around damage, and also the Lobbying Act not being, frankly, by the ex-Prime Minister's own admission, not quite addressing some of these wider issues. Although, and he said, in my representation to government, I was breaking no codes of conduct and no government rules. And while that may be true, do you think there should have been rules given the conflict of interest, as he was set to profit from if the lobbying was successful? So
Rushanara, look, I'm not trying to be unhelpful. This is not an area that I know. These are matters for the Cabinet Office. My understanding is Eric Pickles is in active discussions with the Cabinet Office about, I think is it called ACOBA or whatever that is that governs all these things. I'm not involved in discussions, and I imagine the Cabinet Office is looking at it and is probably the right forum, to decide on the right framework going forward. And look, the points you raised may well have merit. I'm just not familiar with the system, so I can't speak to it. But obviously it's a responsibility for the Cabinet Office, and Eric Pickles has written to them, and I think it's talking to them about exactly ways it.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Well, can I just bring you back to the point you made? Charles, in his session, talked about a total of about 4 hours that had been taken up by the time that was given to Mr. Cameron, and you mentioned that you took the department entertained others who came forward during the crisis. Would you be able to provide, I know others have raised it as well, but would your office be able to give us an indication against a comparator, if you like, so that as part of our inquiry, if it is the case that Mr. Cameron's overtures towards your department it didn't take up that much time, it would be good to see the comparator between his approach and others. And the reason why I raise this is obviously because it's important that people do feel that, as you and others are pointing out, that it doesn't matter who you are. If you've got a good idea, you're going to get the attention that the idea deserves. That there is some sort of merit, and not least because of the recent scandals around the VIP lane, for instance, and the NAO reports and the scandals around and allegations around Conservative donors who have access to government procurement contracts. I appreciate that's not your department, but there have been issues in relation to other departments. You appreciate why I'm asking this, I hope, which is about public confidence in the process, and that civil servants also don't end up, your department's officials didn't, but slightly more junior officials might feel under the cosh that they can't stand up and speak truth to power in terms of those who are powerful prime ministers or ministers or their own ministers.
I think Charles had his hand up. Charles, did you want to come in quickly and then we'll go to the Chancellor?
Just very quickly to clarify, I was referring to my calls with Greensill. Only one of those calls involved Mr. Cameron. So my estimate of that,
the whole affair.
Not Mr. Cameron.
Okay, I meant the Mr. Cameron who was employed by Greensill. So perhaps I should have clarified, Mr. Cameron and Greensill.
He was only on one call. The other calls, he's participant in that call. All the calls were with Mr. Greensill and Mr. Crothers.
But it was 4 hours with the organisation and the representative, including Mr. Cameron, who was...
He participated on one call out of 9. The 9 calls in total, I estimated, took me approximately 4 hours of time over nearly 4 months.
But it's the 4 hours that's key, isn't it?
Right.
Chancellor.
Yeah, I reiterate what I've said before. I mean, this just did not occupy, as you heard from Charles nor me, a huge amount of our time. And when we develop, the record is there. You can look at as I described, the half a dozen other schemes that were launched during this period: C-bills, the iteration of C-bills, CL bills, bounce back loans, trade credit insurance, the future fund. That's just in the financing space. We issued 3 other call for evidences, which are private confidential call for evidences, or 3 other aspects of financing. Then you're familiar with all the things that we have done, whether it's business rates, furlough, etc. That was all the amount of work that we were doing. This was a small amount. I think the bank have provided an estimate in terms of the number of FTEs over several weeks that they thought it took. I can't imagine ours would have been in aggregate much different from that.
Okay, well, it would be great if we could have something in writing on that, on the relative comparators between how much time was spent on this, on Greensill, and others. Thank you.